Good morning, ladies and gentlemen, or good afternoon, sorry. My name is John Skees, and I'm the Director of Media for TAPS. We're going to get started in just a couple of minutes, but first I've got some housekeeping items to address with you. So first and foremost, this webinar is being recorded. You're going to receive an email with a link to that recording sometime later this afternoon. It'll be sent to the same address that you used to register for today's webinar. We're also going to have it posted on our YouTube page, that is youtube.com/tapsbiz. So you can forward that link on to whoever at your school needs to see it. Second, if you have any questions, please use the questions feature on the GoToWebinar interface. We're going to try to answer those as we go through today's presentation, but if we don't get to yours right away, there's a general Q&A session at the end so we can play catch up. But if we don't get to your question, or if it's just too specific to answer appropriately in this venue, please send us an email, info@taps.biz, or call us at the office after the webinar is over. Okay, so I'm joined today by Brian Bunselmeyer, the TAPS Executive Director, Robert Huckabee, TAPS Associate Director and Director of Compliance, and Steve Prudhomme, TAPS Associate Director. And with that, I'm going to hand it over to Brian and we can get started.
Welcome to all of you this afternoon, and thank you for your interest in TAPS Winter Soccer. We're looking forward to a great season, even during this pandemic time. We've made it through the fall so far. However, as COVID cancellations continue to mount, we know that winter soccer could also be affected. We appreciate all of your efforts to get your season started and for the opportunities that you provide for the young men and women in your programs. So with that, I'm going to kick it over to Steve. We'll go over a few key dates.
Yes, the dates can be found on taps.biz. You can look on the calendar. You can also look on the winter soccer page and make sure that you put those down. As this year goes, like no other year we've ever had, please make sure that you're always checking your calendar. If there is a change, we'll send out an email, we'll post, and we'll also change the calendar as goes. So again, the dates are important, but we need to be kind of fluid if something happens. Moving into the important dates for the 2020 season, really the only change from last year for soccer is going to be that we're starting just a little bit later with our first games on November 12th. You'll go on through, or first matches, you'll go on through the entire year to February 9th to your district certification. It's important to note that on certification date, that's the last day that you can play sub-varsity as well. So sometimes sub-varsity gets rained out and say, well, can I go beyond? That's when their season ends, and only those who have qualified varsities who have qualified for the playoffs may move forward. 13th, the playoffs will begin, the championships right there at the end of February, and our all-state meeting will be coming up in March. So watch for those dates. Again, go back and recheck as we go through the dates for the year, and hopefully we'll get all the way to the end of this and be crowning a champion right on cue. Robert, talk to us a little bit about the rules and governance.
All right, Steve, thank you very much. Your basic TAPS rules are found for soccer are found in section 170 of the bylaws, 170 and 171. That's where you'll go to find those. You can find those by going to the homepage of the TAPS website. Up at the top menu bar, you'll see a tab called Resources. If you hover over that Resources tab, about the third item down says Bylaws. If you click on that, give it a second to upload, it'll take you to a big document, and you can scroll on the table of contents on the left-hand side all the way down to section 170, and that's where the TAPS soccer rules are found. Interscholastic competitions, just a reminder, those TAPS rules you find in all of the TAPS bylaws and constitution, but certainly those specific to winter soccer in 170 and 171, those apply to all scrimmages, all games, all tournaments. So we hear often here in the office, oh, I didn't think I had to use that ball or do this because it wasn't a district game. That is not true. It applies to all TAPS competitions, scrimmages, tournaments, and games. If you look in section 170, that's also where you'll find game limitations. TAPS does not have any restrictions on the number of games you can play per day or per week. That's up to your school, your local control. Your administration determines how many games or activities you play in a week. TAPS does limit the number of games, the maximum number of games that you can play during the year. That is also found in section 170. That's 20 games plus 3 tournaments. So 20 games plus 3 tournaments is the maximum you can have all the way through your district certification. If you have any questions about that, you can always reach out to us and we can help you with that. In the playoffs, even in this year, we will still allow warm-up games. So for each round of the playoffs, if you advance to the playoffs, for each round of the playoffs, you will be allowed to pick up a warm-up game if you can do that and schedule that. Eligible opponents is also important. As we move to the next slide, Section 138 still remains in place, even with some of the changes this year. You can play school-based programs. You can play homeschool programs that meet those qualifications outlined there in Section 138. If you need any help with that, reach out to us. We'll help you. You can play other affiliated leagues. You cannot play club teams. You cannot play independent teams. And you cannot play schools who are members of non-approved leagues. Brian?
As we said in other webinars, if you're planning on playing out-of-state opponents, and make sure that you've gone to your coach's toolkit, completed that form, and that is an application to play. TAPS does have to approve those before they become official. If you have games already scheduled, please make sure you get that done so that you can hopefully keep them on your schedule. With COVID and the interstate competition and travel, we are looking at those very seriously to make sure that the tournaments or the out-of-state games that you are attending follow the same COVID or similar COVID requirements that we're requiring. And additionally, you might want to look at coming back after you've been in another place. What are you bringing back? So if you're planning on going to California or Florida, or they're planning on coming here with COVID, please make sure to get with your athletic directors and your heads of school and make sure that in this COVID time, they're willing to risk that exposure. Robert?
All right, Brian, thank you. Let's move on to the official ball, Steve.
Yeah, the official ball TAPS continues to be the Wilson forte. We ask that there be at least 6 balls per match. If you can make that plan, that way you can continue to sanitize, and we'll talk a little bit more about sanitizing the ball throughout the matches. And this is the rule for all games, tournaments, district, non-district, postseason, all of that. Any game that you're hosting and you're providing the ball for, it should be the Wilson. Moving on to game information. Why is game information important to TAPS? It's important to all. We're in charge of the compliance, the eligibility, and also we need this information there so all members of our association will know what people's schedules are, where the standings are, what's happening. So it's important to get your schedules and your scores into rank 1. Make sure that you do it properly, make it public. And that way we can check if there's a problem or an issue. We can see it from our office and talk to you about it and get it fixed before it rolls up on us. But again, we need to keep up with the scores, and score reporting is required. So that's through rank 1 and through ScoreStream. And ScoreStream is the ticker you see that goes across the taps.biz that gives us updated scores until the very final. So again, ScoreStream and rank 1 are required this year. And now our good friends, the officials. And if you're a coach for a long time, sometimes you know the officials in your area longer than you know the other coaches, and it's important. We don't have a game without them, and so that relationship and how we deal with officials is very important. And first thing you need to know is who can officiate your games. So you need to go to Section 134, which will talk a little bit about officials, but we approve all TASO chapters. And if they're TASO, doesn't matter where they are in the state, they are approved automatically. And then we have a list of TAPS approved chapters. And these chapters have made an application to TAPS. They have their insurance, they do the background checks. We have a roster of who they have. They've agreed to follow the TAPS rules. So it's very important that you get a TAPS approved, and it's required that you have a TAPS approved chapter for all your games. And again, district, non-district, tournament, all the way through the year. And there's also, sometimes we get a little bit of a word game going on when we're talking to people who say, hey, I can get officials for you. Well, they're TASO trained. Well, that's good. It's required, but not enough. Hey, they're a member of TASO. They got a patch on their arm. Well, that's good, but it's not enough. Oh, okay. They're assigned through a TAPS chapter a TASO chapter assigner. Now we got what we need, or the assigner for the approved chapter. So they need to be assigned through the chapter. And then obviously they need to be trained and a member, et cetera, et cetera. So make sure you're getting with your officials. And this year, be ready, because we're going to have to work with folks. We don't have as many officials as usual. There might have to be dates moved around, but at least you have that flexibility, as was mentioned earlier, to move dates around and have multiple games per school week. Now moving on to National Federation of High School Rules.
All right,
Robert?
Steve, thank you very much. TAPS, in addition to the TAPS rules that we referenced earlier in Section 170, also follows the NFHS rules for soccer. No variation from that. Those are the rules that apply to all TAPS high school contests. NFHS rules. You can find those rules at nfhs.org, nfhs.org. You can also go there. You can order a copy of the rule book. I think it's usually about $10 or less. One thing that we do here in the TAPS office that assists us a lot when we're out on the road, they have an app where you can purchase a copy of that book and have it on your phone. And that's a very handy tool to have. You don't have to worry about always having that rule book with you if you had a question, or if the officials have a question, or there's a question about a rule or an interpretation. You can have that there handy with you. What we've included here in the next few slides, John, there's 5 or 6 slides here that has some of the highlights of some of the changes for 2020. I'm not going to go through those. I'm not going to read those. Some of you are familiar with some of these changes. This one applies to uniforms. There's one that applies to when the ball is out of play. There's one about how the ball is dropped. But we've got these here in this slide. Like we mentioned earlier, you'll have access to this after the webinar is over. So please go back and review these. We're not going to go through these now. We're just going to highlight that they are there. Before you you maybe don't review them and you're relying on a rule that's been in effect, you've been coaching for many years, and before you scream at the official that what are you doing, that's not the rule, make sure you've looked at those rules first and that you're up to speed on all the recent changes. Steve?
Yes, and some of you guys who are coaching year round and you're under FIFA rules or you're under different sets of rules, get your mind right when you're about to go into the TAPS game and know that it's National Federation rules. And then you'll also be reminding the officials who are doing the same thing in that pregame meeting, which we'll talk a little bit more about, that these are National Federation of High School rules. Robert?
All right. Thank you, John. John, you can jump on down to that eligibility slide right there. Steve, pick up for us there.
Okay. Again, like I said before, TAPS is in charge of the eligibility of all staff, students, and member schools. And so it's very important that we get the information that we need. And that information is going to go into the Rank 1 database. And so it's important that you get all your staff and your students into this properly, or your athletic directors, the ones that are on this call, or if you have an athletic director, make sure they're doing this. Everything goes into Rank 1 before the season begins. Your coach and your staff. First of all, what's a coach? Well, TAPS defines everything. In Section 1 of the bylaws, we have definitions. And so a coach is somebody who's almost has a role as teaching, being on the sideline, whatever. So make sure that you look at the definition of a coach. And if they are a coach, that you get them into Rank 1 properly. And this is for all your varsity and your sub-varsity. There needs to be, the coach creates a profile. They have information in there that's important, contact information that we need. Also, their acknowledgement of rules can be done inside of Rank 1, and they can complete their scope inside of Rank 1. So really, it's a good process for the coaches and also for the students. Hopefully, most of the students are already in the system by this time of year, but do not assume. The student should have a student profile, and inside that profile, they can complete their acknowledgement of rules form, their medical information, medical history, and a physical. Now, the physicals are required by TAPS this year and every year. I know the UIL waived that requirement this year. TAPS did not. So again, they need to have a physical. If for some reason, due to COVID or whatever else, it's difficult for them to get in to get a physical, they need to use last year's or their most recent until they can get that physical done. It needs to be not as soon as convenient, as soon as possible. We want that in. And obviously, if they're coming back from a major injury, concussion, knee surgery, or something like that, they need to be cleared, and that needs to be a requirement right away. All school-based forms can also be put into Rank 1. Schools have been taking advantage of this. And again, they'll be either green or they're red. And sometimes if they're green, it's great, they're moving forward. They're red, we might need something, or the school might need something. There might be something not in the student profile. So you get a chance to get them green before the year begins. And if they're new to the school, their transfer process needs to be completed. Robert?
All right, thank you, Steve. As Steve mentioned, the next thing to do, make sure you have that roster. Okay, so what you would do once you have all your students in, once you have all your staff in, what we also need in Rank 1 is your roster. So you'll create your team for soccer, you'll build your roster, you'll pull those students over, and then they'll be red or green based on all the forms being completed as Steve described. Brian, talk about communication.
As we go to communication, just make sure on your students that you have all high school students participating in that activity, both high school varsity and sub-varsity players. Make sure you get those students in there and make sure they are eligible to compete. Don't want to slip up and get an ineligible student. This time of year, again, with your PAPF forms, we checked with Coach Gunlock, and he does have quite a few soccer players that have not completed their PAPF or their transfer system, all their paperwork. So make sure you get with your athletic directors, check on those soccer players, make sure everybody's good and green to go before you put them out on the field to play. Communication is one of the hardest things we do, and we're trying to get better every day. And it's one of the hardest things y'all do, and you're trying to get better every day. So it's good that we're all on the same highway together. Some of the information that we're going to go, you probably already know, but some of it may be new. To some folks, based on the emails I've been receiving, it is not a new thing that we have a website, but we do have a website. It's www.taps.biz. If you jump over there, John, for me real quick, we're going to walk through a couple of things on that. So www.taps.biz. On that right-hand side, you're going to have resources up at the top. John, if you'll hover over resources for me, and the drop down that says bylaws, that is where you will find the bylaws. It takes a while to load. It is a Google document, so I wouldn't stay too long there. You may need to go to the games needed, either post or get them back. That's good information. If you're looking for officials, especially if you're playing neutral site, you go down to officials, then you'll click on soccer. That'll take you to the TASO site and give you an opportunity. Robert?
Hey, Brian, while we're on this particular place, John, would you hover over that again? On that resources tab, in a few minutes, we're going to talk about COVID information. If you'll see that second item there is COVID information. That'll take you to a page that has all of our most recent updates and COVID protocols that we're going to be going over here in a few minutes. Sorry to interrupt.
No, so again, that resources tab is aptly titled resources. There's a lot of good information there. John, next to the TAPS logo, you've got athletics. If you click on athletics for us, when that page loads, drop down there and click on winter soccer. So click on winter soccer for us. And if you scroll down, if you'll see the score streams are coming across there, those are the scores for fall soccer where it says soccer, but that's where your scores will appear. That's why we're asking you to use score stream. The right-hand side where it says the TAPS Winter Soccer blog, as we do posts, they'll be there. So mark that soccer page, www.taps.biz. Click on athletics, click on winter soccer, and get over here to this page. That'll help you to see what's going on. As we get further down the year, the championship information will be there as well. If you're looking for the brackets, which will be posted next week, up there on the top bar, you'll see the word brackets. Those will be coming next week. And the word standings as we go through. It's very important that you release in rank 1 when you're putting your schedules in. Make sure you make them public, as well as making your scores public, so that we can populate the scores, the standings, and the brackets. Go on back to the presentation if you would for me, John. As we jump back into the presentation, we do have a soccer page, we do have a soccer blog. The emails that are shown in rank 1 and any push notifications will only be sent to those emails. So we need for each coach, both varsity and sub-varsity, and both head coaches and assistant coaches, to make sure that they've done their rank 1 profiles. Make sure that email address is correct. If you're the head coach, make sure you've got your cell phone in there as well, just in case we have to move forward and make a contact that way. As you go through the year, @TAPS Soccer is our Twitter for soccer. Please make sure to include us in your accomplishments. If you've got pictures, if you've got other things, please keep us in mind. That'll also populate on that TAPS Soccer page. Good page to share and a good link to share with your fan base. So jump on down to the next one, John, and we're going to start talking about health and safety protocols. I'm going to jump off here and just make a real quick statement about the general requirements. They're in section 142. So if you go to taps.biz, hover over resources, click on that big document called bylaws, it'll take you to section 142. I encourage each of you to take a look at that as far as what your health and safety training are required and what the requirements are for your students. I would also be remiss right here, if we are in winter soccer and there is winter weather, just make sure you read that section that tells you what to do when the temperatures start to hover around freezing, either ambient or wind chill. So section 142 of the TAPS bylaws will give you those general health and safety rules. Robert?
All right, we're going to stay on health and safety, but we're going to transition to COVID. And we're going to begin with what we've been doing throughout all of our fall activities when we have any kind of game, is that we have to have, It's critical that we have communication between the two teams. So our COVID communication is going to be pregame prior to every scheduled game. What will be required of all schools for every contest hosted by a TAPS member school. So that's what we're going to be talking about here the next few slides. This applies to all scrimmages, all games, and all tournaments. So any scrimmage, any game, any tournament hosted by a TAPS member school, prior to the game, the two schools need to communicate and make sure that both teams and everybody attending the game is good to go. What are you going to be doing? Well, each team is going to affirm that all participants are symptom-free the day of the contest. So all participants, that's coaches, that's players, that's any team personnel, anybody connected with your team attending that contest, your school, your head coach, your AD is going to certify to the other school. You're going to affirm that all of our people are well and good to go. The home team will be doing that as well. The teams will be sharing that information with each other. And then as we move on to the next slides, John, the officials. The home team will be responsible to coordinate with the officials to know that they're good to go as well. And so that when they come to the game, they know both schools have done the same thing. Exactly what is it that you are affirming? This is our pregame affirmation that's been there in our protocol since back in August. Everybody at a TAPS event is self-screening. And what are they self-screening for? Well, those are the people who are going to be there, the staff, the coaches, players, trainers, managers, anybody who's helping the officials, clock operator, scoreboard, anybody involved, the ticket takers, if you have concessions, those people as well. All those people at the game are affirming that, John, if you'll move to that next slide, at a minimum, they do not have the COVID symptoms. They are not lab confirmed positive for COVID, nor have they had close contact with an individual who is COVID positive. So that's the affirmation that everybody is making at every TAPS contest this year. All participants, all fans, all officials, anybody at the event, either the coaches doing it with each other, the officials doing it with the home team, and then the fans doing that as a part of their entrance into the facility, whether it's done through a ticketing process. We do digital ticketing through TAPS. If anybody was at cross country this last Monday, all the fans had to purchase a digital ticket. A part of that purchase, those affirmations are being made. That went really smooth. Some of you obviously have signs posted. All those things are in our COVID protocols. We need that peace of mind that everybody attending that game, whether you're home or away, is operating under the same dynamic. We stay on health and safety and we look at these protocols, and now we kind of move to how do these protocols affect my program? Brian?
As we look to each program, each school is going to have a different set of protocols for the most part as to how they're operating, whether a student's eligible or ineligible based on a positive test, whether a presumptive positive, whether they have the symptomology and are sent home. So each school needs to apply their school-based COVID protocol for their programs, and the program should be similar. In other words, there should not be a different protocol for basketball or football or volleyball or soccer. They should all be the same as we move forward through. One of the things I want to mention before I forget, which is happening more and more these days for me with COVID, is the COVID burnout, which is in TAPS. If you are tested positive and you have a positive test, to get back into the field of play and to participate in athletics, you must have a doctor's release. So just like a concussion or a major injury, whether it be an ACL or an Achilles, etc., if you have that, you must have a doctor's release to get back in. So you've heard some things probably going around in other leagues or other situations. I'll go get a negative test, or once I receive a negative test, I can return to play. Or I've sat out my 14 days, so I'm ready to come back because I followed the protocol. Yes, you followed that protocol, but you must, as a student, to return to play, you must have that doctor's release. Part of that is the cardiac, part of that is the other symptomology that's showing up. John, skip on down one more for us. Local control is what's going to keep what's going on your team going on. So we have a limitation in the stands for 50% of fans, and that is our limitation regardless of what your local area says. If the local area says you can't have more than 25, then of course you need to bow to that. It is more strict than TAPS. Again, practice time, that's up to you at local control, where you practice, local control. The biggest thing on those practice protocols is, again, they should be very similar. Football and soccer don't have anywhere near the same equipment, but they do have both have the same rating as a highly sensitive area during COVID because of contact, just like basketball. So make sure that your protocols, your practice times, how you're working things through work together. I will tell you from the volleyball experience, as you're going through soccer, if you have that sub-varsity and they're practicing at the same time as the varsity, they're together lifting weights or they're together doing whatever, those become that one cohort group. So if there's an ability to practice them separately, you may want to look at that. I know you already have, but we've seen that hit volleyball more times than not. Than it was a straight JV player that was never going to play with the varsity, but they traveled on the same bus, they tested positive, and now both teams are out. So just keep that in context. Again, the TAPS rules, they do apply to all TAPS hosted contests. That's a scrimmage, a game, or a tournament. So when we go through these later, where we're discussing what fans must do, what players must do when they're on the bench, while you're warming up, while you're coming in, those go to scrimmages, games, and tournaments. And locally, your protocols, if they're more strict, for those situations, make sure you let your opponent know so that as they come in, they're ready to go. I'm going to jump down when I'm sitting here looking at the playing area. The bench area, social distancing as best you can. If you only have one bench, obviously they're going to sit side by side, but social distance when you can. Clean and disinfect between contests and make sure you're in keeping with your school-based protocols. The balls, we are asking for that 6-ball rotation. You are going to need ball boys or ball girls. They should have some kind of a sanitizer wipe to wipe down the balls as they go out of play. So it may not be what you're used to, but that's what we need. And if you're using 6 balls, that needs to be 6 of the Wilson Fortes. So let's make sure we're using the right balls, not whatever a club or whoever might have had when they came out. You definitely need to make all balls be sanitized at halftime when a ball goes out of replay, or if it's requested by an official. So as the officials go forward, make sure you listen to them. One thing about the officials is they are not in charge of the protocol that will be followed on the sideline. However, they can report it if it's not followed. So John, skip on down. The TASO directives, they will, as you're using your TASO or TAPS approved officials, they have pretty extensive requirements for what they're expecting when the officials show up. One of the things that's big on the pregame meeting is that there'll only be one coach and one player from each team, and the social distancing is required. Masks are highly encouraged, I would say, for y'all. If you go out there, please make sure you have that mask on. That protects our officials, that protects our coaches and your team. Player introductions, social distance as much as possible. Do not do the handshake fist bump with the officials, as a lot of folks do when they come out. We're going to stay on our side of the pitch. They'll stay on theirs, the officials in the middle. One of the things about player huddles is if you all have a mask on and you're in a player huddle, that's different. If you and your players don't have a mask on in your player huddle, please make sure you spread that out as much as possible. Prayers fine. National anthem, we're still discouraging live singing, as are most of the rest of the United States. So we'll go forward. John, drop down one more to contest and tournaments. One of the things that's very important to remember about contest and tournaments is that a tournament may this year need to be moved into more of a match play or a showcase style instead of back to back to back. You're going to have a place, if they're staying on the same campus, they're going to have a place to sit. Now you've got to worry about social distancing, etc. So please make sure that during your tournaments, if you're hosting them, all those requirements Robert read to you earlier and walked through, where you have to get the coaches to certify that the players and all the team personnel are COVID symptom free and have not been around you, those are in play for all teams in the tournament. As the director, as the sponsor, that would be your responsibility at that point to make sure all that is there and is disseminated, all that information. Again, you're also the COVID tracing person. So if you are the one that is running the tournament and a team leaves you on Saturday, and on Monday, coach calls and says, oh, by the way, we have a problem, then you have to be able to COVID trace back to everybody they played, et cetera. So running a tournament may be a little more difficult this year than making sure the balls and the officials and the clock are working. You have a little bit more to do on the COVID tracing. While we're there, I'm going to jump out and talk, John, on the next one about face coverings. I cannot imagine in my lifetime, these 59 years I've walked this earth, that face coverings would be the most important thing, but 2020 has taught me to be prepared for anything. So managers, scorebook, trainers, players on the bench, and before and after the game should have a mask on, face covering before the game, while they're on the bench, athletic trainers, scorebook managers, while they're jogging up and down the side and stretching, ready to enter the pitch, they could obviously take the mask off at that point if your school allows. The recommended local control on the right-hand side. The head coach, if you're up and you're talking, it is recommended that you have a face mask on, but you do not have to unless your school requires that. The assistant coaches do need to have a mask on. Players, it's local control during warm-up in the contest. If your school requires your athletes to wear a face mask, that is perfectly fine. We would not stop that in any way, shape, or form. However, your opponent may decide they don't want to wear a face mask during pregame warm-up in the contest. That is okay. You control your students. The other team controls their students. Now, we may have a school that says, I have to wear a face mask, and I can only play if you agree to wear a face mask. That is a request, not a requirement. So again, each school controls the COVID protocols for their own players. I think most officials, when they're walking around prior to the game, will have a face mask on. I think once the games have started, they're going to allow the R1 and the ARs or the R2, if you're using a 2 system, to go without. But that will be will remain to be seen what we have on that. So, Robert, I think that covers the face coverings for contest personnel, unless I've missed something or we have questions to that effect.
No, I think we're good for now. We do have one question. We'll go ahead and grab that right here. Will the all-state meetings be in person or over Zoom? Right now, we're planning all-state meetings in person. We've got our schedule for fall soccer that's in the playoffs right now. Volleyball is starting playoffs, and then football after that. So right now, our plan is to schedule those all in person. If you're not able to attend, if your district representative is not able to attend, we will have the ability for you to be able to call in and participate by phone so that everyone is represented.
And that'll be on the north side of Waco at the Bellmead Civic Center. So it'll still be in the Waco area, Central Texas, when we get there. Steve?
Well, talking a little bit more about uniforms and some of the uniform allowances we're going to have this year for COVID. They will be allowing long sleeves, long pants, the undergarments, but they must be a single color, color of dominant color on the uniform top. We kind of give these allowances also when it gets pretty cold, but again, being covered up makes it a little bit easier. Moving on to the game balls, we've mentioned this a couple of times, but we want to be able to rotate and keep the ball sanitized as much as we can as they go out, come up with a system. And again, some people already have, but again, that's one aspect of what we're doing to mitigate the risk. Sanitizing hands, kind of need to turn into a kindergarten teacher. You need to be washing those hands, give them an opportunity to sanitize their hands when they're coming off at halftime. I know you're not supposed to use your hands in soccer, but I've watched soccer matches, I know. So make sure that you're sanitizing every chance that you get. Excuse me, after the match, it's going to be different. And because we're used to being after the match, everybody coming together and doing the handshake, it's going to be a little bit different. It's time to put on your face mask, make sure that we're socially distanced. There shouldn't be a direct interaction, handshakes or slapping hands or coming together in the middle of the field. We need to kind of give them the wave, tell them good game, and then kind of go about our different ways. So it's important that we keep the social distancing when we're leaving the bench, when we're going to our locker room. And again, y'all all have different facilities, you know, kind of the ins and the outs. So be aware of that after the match. It's a different way of doing it, but to get us through this year and mitigate risk whenever and wherever possible, there should not be a post-game handshake. Moving on to travel. Brian.
Before we jump there, I'm going to jump back real quick to uniforms. It's been our pleasure to host the state championships these few years that I've been around, the last 14. And it's important to note that we have many uniform violations show up every year, especially in soccer. So you need to go to nfhs.org. You need to click on your activity, which is soccer. You need to go to that page and make sure that your soccer uniforms are in compliance with the current rules. That includes numbering, that includes piping. It's very specific. But make sure that your uniforms are in compliance. If you have a question, you can email us at info@taps.biz. But I'm just going to implore you, don't make that be an issue later on because you've had a wrong uniform that you may have had for the last few years.
And sock color. We had that in the state final. We had to change socks at the last second. So be aware of the rules and make sure that you're prepared.
A lot of times those rules don't come into play, but if you get the wrong official, the wrong opponent, it can be a very big thing. travel, again, one of the things that we're looking at on the travel side is especially interstate travel, where you're moving between one state and another. If you're going out of state, make sure again that you have filled out the form and received approval. That form is in your coach's toolkit in rank 1. The other side of travel, folks have asked, what does TAPS require? How many per seat, or how many in a bus, or how many event? We don't do that. That's up to your school. So whatever your school's local travel policies, if you're having to travel and spend the night, if it's 1 or 6 people in a room, that's totally up to you and your school. So we're going to jump down, John, bounce that next one to the fans. Fans have become the hardest part of the COVID relationship. I hate to say it, but fans want to be unique in whether they wear a face mask or not. And I know it's a struggle in all of the contests we've had so far. So for fans, we're at 50% of capacity is the maximum you can have. You still must maintain your 6-foot social distancing. If you're not 6 foot socially distanced, you must have your mask on. That's for everyone except someone who has a medical clearance. If they have a medical clearance, then of course they should have a medical waiver that they can show you. The other part about the fans is they should have a face covering on when they enter or leave the facility. They should have a mask on when they're in populated areas such as the walkway, in and around the bathrooms and or concession stands. So fans, if they're sitting by themselves or in their family pod and they're 6 foot from anybody else, they don't have to wear their mask. However, pretty much everywhere else in the stands and coming and going, they will need to have their face coverings on at that time. So we just want to make sure that as you have questions, this is no different than what we're requiring for football outside, for fall soccer outside, what we've required inside for volleyball and basketball. It's all pretty much the same. It's going to be a little different because a lot of times in our soccer groups, you don't have a game administrator, but I would be remiss if I didn't remind you that if you're hosting the contest, you should have a game administrator, and it's that home game administrator which should help with the fans to make sure they're in COVID compliance. Auxiliary groups come into play every now and then. John, if you'll drop down one, those auxiliary groups come into play in soccer every now and then. Drop down, will give them that list: the band, the drum line, the cheerleaders, the dance team, the spirit groups. I know a lot of times they do not show up at soccer matches, and for that, I wish you well in getting them there. But if they are there, there are definite plans for what they can do and when they can do. Whether they wear a face mask when performing, et cetera, that's totally up to local control of that school. Whether they attend or not is the duty of the host school, and make sure you explain up front to any guests that are coming your way if you're not allowing auxiliary groups to perform. Let's go back to Steve to a little bit to the playoffs, see if we can work our way through that.
Yes. So we're going to go through this year. Everyone's going to be following the rules. We're all going to be supporting each other and communicating. And we're hoping to get to the very end and get to the playoff tournament. And again, the playoff brackets will be coming out later next week, and we're putting that together. There's some schools that have been added, but more have been dropped, and so we're trying to get down to exactly who we're dealing with. Be ready for this bracket. It'll be a little different with COVID. There'll be some adjustments, and also there might be some adjustments mid-year. Just depends on what's happening with COVID. So again, fluidity is part of it, and you got to be ready, and you got to listen to what the communications and checking back. But again, be ready for the brackets to come out next week. When you go to the playoffs, the first part's a little bit easier. In the playoffs, drop down one, John. The higher seed and by district and area games gets to be host. That's a little bit easier. You come to my place, I'll take care of you, and you need to communicate, make sure that goes smoothly. As we move on, though, we go to neutral site regional contest. This is where it's going to get a little tough. We can tell you, because of what we've been going through this year, it's going to be difficult to find neutral site games. And some schools aren't going to want to have you out there. Some facilities won't. So start making your plans early, make those connections. Think about what's going to be happening as you move forward. Also think about the protocols of what you have, and then and TAPS, and also the host facilities. So as you go in there, make sure that everyone is clear on the protocols between the two teams. Make sure you have an understanding of how many fans will be allowed. And again, the full expectation of TAPS is that it's equitable to both sides. But look at the bench, make sure that you're understanding where everybody's going to be. Are we going to have a locker room? Probably not. Come ready to play. Auxiliary groups, all of that. And so again, go through every single detail, and that game administrator, site administrator needs to be there on site to help to support you, but also watching for all the COVID issues that could go on, as well as the regular responsibilities. So again, make sure you understand what you're going into as you're making these playoff negotiations and putting these plans in place. And again, make sure we have everything, including the local personnel on site, what's their COVID protocol, and make sure they've been screened and they have their affirmation. So it was a little bit easier last year. So just understand that we're in a little bit more complex world. But moving on to the championship. So you've gone through you've gone through everywhere, and now you're getting down to the championships. And Brian's going to talk to you about that happy moment.
As we work towards the championships, one of the things that comes across on the brackets as well is just make sure that you understand the brackets will be different this year as we go through COVID-19, in that the dates on the brackets are going to be solid. So if you already know you have EYBL, if you think ahead of time and you're forecasting, and the forecast would be 32 degrees outside and sleet and snow, you can play those games early, but we're not going to have extensions of the deadline. So the deadlines are going to be in place. As the coach who's working their way and planning their way through the brackets, please understand that the brackets will not, the playing dates will not be moved back. Volleyball and football and fall soccer have already proven that to be the way. With COVID, you don't ever know when it might strike. So just keep that in mind as the brackets. So one of the things that we're going to do at TAPS Championships is make sure everything is live streamed, limited attendance. Well, right now it's 50% capacity, so it might be less than that. We're going to have a longer time between contests. We're going to look to go to 4-hour blocks, which means we may start earlier or finish later. Locker rooms will not be available this year. Most of our host facilities are indicating they're not going to allow their locker rooms to be used as long as their teams are still playing. And so far, each of those opportunities that we've had to bring 6 games in for the championships, we've been told no. We will try to sanitize the benches between games, pre and post game. The introductions and awards, we kind of talked about that earlier. No fist bumps, no. The international walkout will be a little different if we choose to do that, or we may just bring the teams to the sideline. All of those things you can use. If you go through protocols that you're finding are very positive at your school, please drop us a note at info@taps.biz and say, you know what, here's our pregame, here's some of the things we're doing. We'd love to be able to share that with our other schools and to help us as we work through our protocols as well. So I think that knowing what's coming, I think knowing that what we have going forward is going to be different this year. I think live streaming when you can is a huge positive. But I also think that, you know, we definitely think that mom and dad need to be in the stands when they can be. I think that's part of what makes high school. And I know that the clubs, and I know that we've had those games going on all along. Just remember, in the high school realm, it is a little different than what other folks are allowing. So again, we appreciate it. We look forward to everybody having a great season and moving forward. Robert's going to visit with us a little bit here about what happens if COVID attacks your team and contests can and cannot be played.
All right, thank you, Brian. We've done a little overview of your season, important dates, rules to follow, some protocols that are in place. These are our TAPS minimum protocols. They have to be followed. They are not optional. Certainly, as Brian and Steve have mentioned, your local school could have more stringent requirements for your players or your team. You cannot impose that on your opponent. But as we move through the season, what happens if a team cannot play a contest due to COVID issues? We've had that happen in fall soccer and volleyball and football. We've had game cancellations due to COVID, due to quarantines. We expect it will continue. We certainly hope it settles down, but you need to know that it's there, and you need to kind of be planning for that. What happens if I cannot play a contest due to COVID? It's a non-district game. Well, it's a no contest. If you can reschedule it and play it, that's great. If you can't, it's just a no contest. What happens when we move on to our district games? Once again, if the cancellation is due to COVID, it's a no contest. What we're doing throughout the non-district and the district portion of your schedule, we're giving schools an opportunity to play games. If they cannot because of COVID, and if they cannot get it rescheduled by that district certification date, it will stand as a no contest. Will you end up with standings where some games are played and some aren't? Yes, you will. We've had that throughout volleyball and football and fall soccer already.
And we've had several of the same question about how do I put it in rank 1? You do not put a score, but there's a summary there. And if you put no contest, it'll show up as a no contest. And that way people will know what happened. And again, there's not a win or a loss.
Yep. Thank you, Steve. Now let's move on to the next slide. Let's move to the playoffs. As we've explained to people throughout our fall sports, we're now moving. We're already in the playoffs for fall soccer. We're moving into volleyball now and football very shortly. Once we move into the bracket, once we move into the playoffs, there is no longer an opportunity for a no contest. We have to have a clear winner and loser in each round of the playoffs so that we can advance through the bracket to our championships on time. And unfortunately, and it's already happened a couple of times in some of our sports that are playing right now, if you cannot honor that date on the TAPS calendar for that round of the playoffs due to COVID, unfortunately, you will have to forfeit that game and the other team will then move on. There's no other way we can do the playoffs, stay on schedule, and get through our seasons this year. So keep that in mind. We certainly hope and pray for the best for everybody with regard to safety and health, and obviously following a lot of these protocols that many of you are doing and doing very successfully at your school is just as, if not more critical, when we move into the world of extracurriculars and all the things we have going on there. Our championships, the same. We'll handle those issues as best we can when those arise. We hope when we get to that point, and we've only got 2 teams left in each division, we hope we can get all of those games played. Brian?
So again, Robert, www.taps.biz, hover over that resources tab, drop down to the COVID protocols. Those are already posted, what we're going to do both during the district season, preseason, and the postseason. One thing that becomes even more important this year, and it kind of goes against some of the grain in soccer, and we get that, is that every game must be played to a conclusion. So there are no ties in TAPS soccer. How you get there, your district can determine. By the time you get to the TAPS playoffs, we do use the 2 overtime and then the golden goal opportunity. So every game must be played to conclusion, especially during this COVID year. Ties would, you're going to have no contest, and then to have the ties as well would not be a positive situation.
And just as a reminder, we've covered this at every webinar we've done, and we mentioned it earlier today, the basketball webinar. This year more than ever, meet together as a district before you begin your season. Go over the protocols at your school, the expectations, your facility, anything the other team needs to know, whether you're hosting the game or whether you're the visitor. It's critical that your district meet, go over all this, make sure everybody's on the same page, or make sure everybody knows what the expectations are at each of your schools, and follow up before each game. Obviously, you'll be sharing those affirmations between the schools, but just double check and know what the expectations are for fans, for facilities, for entrance, exit, all those kind of things. So there are no surprises and no unknown expectations as you move into the actual contest.
And it's okay to repeat with each other. Again, you teach them how to talk on the pitch when they're out there. They're talking constantly. We need that amongst all the coaches in the district. Constant talk, retalk, and double checking needs to be going on this year. And again, you guys are equipped to do that. And it's going to get us through this year. And it's going to get us to that championship. So again, we appreciate you guys being here. Brian?
As we get ready to conclude, just encourage you to get your scores into ScoreStream and into Rank 1. Both have the ability to put your sub-varsity as well as your varsity contest in there. That is totally up to you. If you want to put your sub-varsity, it is mandatory that you put your varsity contest, both boys and girls, as you move forward into both ScoreStream and Rank 1. Especially in Rank 1, make sure you turn your schedules so that you'll to public, so that they'll show up on the standings page. Make sure you turn your scores to public so that they'll show up on the standings page. Twitter handle is TAPS Soccer. Fill us in, include us anytime you tweet stuff out. We'd love to have you as part of our extended TAPS family. So you can reach us at www.taps.biz. Info, I-N-F-O at TAPS, T-A-P-P-S.biz. And that phone number here is a Central Texas phone number, but we're sitting high above the Texas Motor Speedway. Give us a holler, 254-947-9268. Thank you for being part of the TAPS extended family. Thank you for being part of the TAPS coaching, the 6,000 fraternity and sorority groups that we have. We have a lot of fine people coaching our young men and women, and you're a part of that, and we appreciate you being part of TAPS. John, finish up with your final words, and away we'll go from this webinar.
Thank you, Brian. Thank you, Robert. Thank you, Steve. And thank you all, folks, for being here today. Once again, this webinar has been recorded. That is going to be made available to you later this afternoon. You're going to receive an email with a link to that recording. It's also going to be on YouTube. That's youtube.com/tapsbiz. If you still can't find it, or if you have any trouble, please send us an email, info@taps.biz, or call us at the office and we will get it to you. If you need anything else, don't hesitate to contact us. And you folks enjoy the rest of your day.